The historical origins of Buddhist meditation. Suffering does not announce itself loudly. It settles quietly into the body, the breath, the unspoken corners of the mind. It hums beneath ambition and success, beneath entertainment and distraction. Long before meditation apps, before studios and cushions arranged in careful symmetry, human beings felt this same quiet ache. They looked at the arc of birth and aging, at loss and longing, and sensed that life, as ordinarily lived, was somehow unfinished. The historical origins of Buddhist meditation are rooted not in philosophy for its own sake, but in this intimate, universal recognition that something in the human heart is restless, and that restlessness seeks understanding. In ancient India, the world was alive with questions. Forests echoed with debate, villages with ritual, palaces with power, and hermitages with silence. People spoke of gods and sacrifices, of social duty and cosmic order, but beneath these systems was a deeper inquiry, one that turned inward. Meditation did not arise as an escape from life, but as a way of seeing life clearly, without ornament or denial. It emerged as a disciplined intimacy with experience itself. The Buddha did not invent meditation in a vacuum. He inherited a living culture of contemplative practice, shaped by centuries of experimentation with breath, posture, attention, and insight. Yet what distinguishes the Buddhist path is not merely technique, but orientation. Meditation became a means of liberation rather than transcendence, a way of understanding suffering rather than bypassing it, a practice grounded in direct knowing rather than belief. To explore the historical origins of Buddhist meditation is to walk slowly through layers of human experience: ascetic struggle, royal privilege, intellectual rigor, and quiet perseverance. It is to encounter a tradition that valued silence not as emptiness, but as clarity. In tracing these origins, we are not looking backward out of nostalgia. We are listening for a voice that still speaks, not from the past, but from the depths of the present moment. Before there was Buddhism, there was a world already steeped in contemplation. The Indian subcontinent, centuries before the Buddha's awakening, was a landscape of spiritual experimentation. The Vedic tradition emphasized ritual precision and cosmic harmony, seeking to align human life with the rhythms of the universe through sacrifice and chant. Yet alongside this ritual culture grew a counter-current, one that questioned whether liberation could be found through external acts alone. This questioning gave rise to the renunciant movement. Men and women left their homes, families, and social roles to wander forests and riverbanks. They shaved their heads, donned simple robes, and committed themselves to radical inquiry. Their laboratories were their own bodies and minds. Their texts were experience itself. They fasted, restrained the breath, sat in stillness, and explored altered states of consciousness. Meditation in this context was not a unified system, but a field of investigation. These early practitioners sought release from the cycle of rebirth, from the endless repetition of craving and disappointment. Some aimed for union with an absolute principle, others for annihilation of individuality, still others for mastery over mind and matter. Techniques varied widely: breath control, sensory withdrawal, concentration on internal images, and intense austerities that pushed the body to its limits. The forest became a place of both insight and danger, where clarity and delusion often walked side by side. Into this world was born Siddhartha Gautama. His early life, sheltered within palace walls, was marked by abundance and refinement, yet the historical context matters here. His renunciation was not a sudden rebellion, but a response shaped by the spiritual climate of his time. When he left the palace, he entered an already established network of teachers and practices. He studied with renowned meditation masters who taught deep states of absorption, where the mind becomes unified, luminous, and still. These states were powerful, They brought peace, rapture, and an escape from ordinary suffering. But they were not final. Siddhartha realized that even the most refined meditative absorptions were conditioned and impermanent. They could suppress suffering, but not uproot it. When the mind emerged from these states, old patterns returned. This insight marked a turning point in the history of meditation. It introduced a subtle but profound shift. Liberation would not come from perfecting states of consciousness, but from understanding the nature of experience itself. The Buddha's great innovation was not the rejection of meditation, but its reorientation. He retained concentration as a foundation, recognizing the necessity of a stable and attentive mind. But he paired it with insight, clear seeing into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-ownership. Meditation became a tool for wisdom, not merely tranquility. The practitioner was invited to observe sensations, feelings, perceptions, and thoughts as processes rather than possession. Historically, this marked the emergence of what we now recognize as distinctly Buddhist meditation. It was grounded in everyday experience: breathing, walking, eating, feeling pleasure and pain. There was no need to escape the world to understand it. In fact, the world itself became the field of awakening. This approach democratized meditation. It was no longer reserved for extreme ascetics or intellectual elites, but offered to monks, nuns, householders, and kings alike. The early Buddhist community preserved these practices through oral transmission. Meditation instructions were memorized, repeated, and embodied. They were refined through communal living and individual practice. Importantly, meditation was never isolated from ethics and understanding. The historical record shows that mindfulness and concentration were cultivated alongside moral discipline and right view. This integration prevented meditation from becoming a mere technology of self-enhancement. In the forests and monasteries of ancient India, meditation was a lived experiment. Practitioners tested the teachings against their own suffering. They observed how craving tightened the chest, how anger burned the mind, how attachment narrowed perception. They also observed how mindful attention softened these patterns, creating space and choice. Over time, a coherent path emerged, one that balanced effort with ease, discipline with compassion. The historical origins of Buddhist meditation are thus inseparable from a deep respect for human experience as it is. The Buddha did not ask his followers to adopt metaphysical positions blindly. He invited them to look, to feel, to know directly. Meditation was the means by which this knowing became possible. It trained attention to stay, to not turn away, to meet reality without flinching. As Buddhism spread beyond India, these meditative practices adapted to new cultures and languages. Yet their core remained intact, a commitment to understanding suffering through direct observation. The simplicity of sitting, breathing, and knowing continues to echo across centuries. It reminds us that the historical origins of Buddhist meditation are not confined to ancient texts or distant forests. They are alive wherever a human being pauses, attends, and listens deeply to the truth of their own experience. As the Buddha's teachings took root, meditation began to mature into a living tradition, rather than a personal discovery bound to one life. What had been forged through solitary struggle in forests and villages now entered a communal rhythm. Monasteries arose not as places of retreat from the world, but as containers for careful attention. The historical development of Buddhist meditation during this early period was shaped less by theory and more by repetition, memory, and lived refinement. Each generation practiced, observed results, and adjusted with humility. In the earliest communities, meditation was inseparable from daily life. Monks walked for alms at dawn, receiving food without preference or demand. This was not only a social arrangement, it was meditative training. Desire and aversion revealed themselves clearly when the bowl was empty or filled. Eating became an act of awareness, not indulgence. Sitting meditation was balanced by walking meditation, standing, lying down, and working. The body itself became a moving field of contemplation. Historically, this emphasis mattered. Meditation was not framed as an escape into special hours of silence alone. It was embedded into posture, gesture, and response. When the Buddha instructed mindfulness of breathing, it was not an abstract technique, but an invitation to return again and again to the most intimate rhythm of life. Breath required no belief, no doctrine. It was already present. In this simplicity lay a quiet revolution. As teachings were transmitted orally, precision became essential. Meditation instructions were carefully phrased to avoid confusion or exaggeration. Attention was directed not toward mystical visions, but toward what could be verified directly. Sensations arising and passing, feelings shifting from pleasant to unpleasant, thoughts appearing and dissolving. This grounded approach distinguished Buddhist meditation from many contemporaneous systems that emphasized metaphysical absorption or supernatural attainment. Over time, two complementary strands became clearer. One emphasized calm and unification of mind, the steadying of attention so that distraction softened and clarity emerged. The other emphasized insight, the capacity to see phenomena as transient processes rather than fixed realities. Historically, these were never meant to be separate paths competing for authority. They were understood as mutually supportive. Calm allowed insight to deepen. Insight prevented calm from becoming attachment. The spread of Buddhism beyond the Ganges region introduced new challenges. As meditation traveled to different cultures, climates, and social structures, its forms adapted. In some regions, monastic life flourished with strong institutional support. In others, practitioners lived on the margins, preserving meditation through small lineages and personal instruction. Yet the core orientation remained consistent: liberation through understanding, not through domination of the mind. One of the most important historical developments during this period was the clarification of intention. Meditation was not practiced to become special, pure, or superior. It was practiced to understand suffering and its cessation. This orientation protected the practice from becoming rigid or performative. When difficulties arose, restlessness, doubt, dullness, they were not treated as failures, but as objects of awareness. Even confusion became a teacher. The historical record suggests that meditation was often challenging, sometimes uncomfortable, and rarely romanticized. Practitioners spoke of aching legs, wandering minds, and moments of deep discouragement. Yet they also spoke of subtle joy, not dependent on circumstances. This joy did not come from achieving a particular state, but from the easing of inner resistance. The mind learned, slowly, how to stop fighting reality. As centuries passed, commentarial traditions emerged to preserve and systematize meditative knowledge. These texts did not invent new experiences, but named patterns already observed. They mapped stages of attention, common obstacles, and shifts in perception, while later generations sometimes mistook these maps for the territory itself. Their original function was pragmatic, to help practitioners recognize where they were and continue wisely. Historically, Buddhist meditation also encountered power. Kings and rulers supported monasteries, sometimes out of genuine faith, sometimes for political legitimacy. This patronage allowed meditation to flourish materially, but it also introduced risks. Comfort could dull urgency. Institutional stability could harden into hierarchy. The tradition responded by emphasizing renunciation of clinging, even to status and security. True meditation, it was said, could not be guaranteed by robes or titles. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this historical evolution is how little the essence changed. Across centuries of transmission, the heart of the practice remained intimate and personal. Sit down, feel the body, know the breath, observe the mind without ownership. Let experience teach you. This simplicity allowed meditation to survive cultural shifts, philosophical debates, and even periods of decline. In this way, the historical origins of Buddhist meditation reveal a tradition shaped not by grand theory, but by patient attention. It grew through listening rather than asserting, through correction rather than certainty. Each practitioner stood in continuity with those before, not by imitation, but by shared inquiry. Meditation was never meant to freeze history. It was meant to liberate those living within it. When we look back at this unfolding, we see not a static system, but a living conversation between suffering and understanding. The past does not ask us to repeat it exactly. It asks us to practice with the same sincerity. In doing so, we step into a lineage defined not by names or dates, but by a willingness to see clearly, moment by moment, what it means to be human. As Buddhist meditation moved across centuries and continents, it encountered new languages, temperaments, and historical pressures. Yet what is most striking is not how much it changed, but how carefully it preserved its inner orientation. Wherever it traveled, meditation carried with it a quiet refusal to become merely symbolic. It insisted on direct experience. It asked each practitioner, regardless of culture or era, to sit down within their own life and look honestly at what was happening there. When Buddhism entered new lands, meditation adapted to different social realities. In some regions, vast monastic institutions arose, housing thousands. In others, solitary hermits continued the forest tradition, living with little more than a robe, a bowl, and the sky overhead. These forms looked different from the outside, but internally they were united by the same discipline of attention. Whether surrounded by chanting voices or the sound of wind through trees, meditation returned again and again to immediacy. Historically, this adaptability was crucial. A tradition too rigid would have fractured under the weight of time. Buddhist meditation survived because it did not demand a single cultural expression. What mattered was not posture, perfected, or ritual complexity, but the quality of awareness brought to experience. This allowed the practice to remain alive rather than preserved like an artifact. As philosophical schools developed, debates arose about the nature of mind, reality, and liberation. Some traditions emphasized emptiness, others clarity, others compassion as the primary lens. Yet meditation itself remained remarkably grounded. Practitioners were still asked to observe thoughts as thoughts, feelings as feelings, sensations as sensations. Even when metaphysical language became elaborate, the practice returned to simplicity. This tension between conceptual refinement and experiential humility became a defining feature of Buddhist history. One of the deeper historical shifts occurred when meditation encountered literacy and writing. Teachings that had once lived almost entirely through memory and personal instruction were now recorded. This preserved invaluable knowledge, but it also introduced a subtle danger, the possibility of confusing understanding with reading, insight with explanation. The tradition responded by continually emphasizing practice over theory. Words could point, but they could not replace. Throughout periods of social upheaval, wars, political collapse, cultural assimilation, meditation often retreated into quiet corners. Sometimes monasteries were destroyed, teachers scattered, and lineages interrupted. Yet the practice survived because it required very little: a human body, a few moments of stillness, a willingness to attend. In this way, Buddhist meditation proved historically resilient, not because it was protected, but because it was portable. Another important development was the increasing recognition of meditation as a path not limited to monastics. While renunciation remained central, householders practiced alongside monks and nuns. Farmers, merchants, parents and elders sat quietly at dawn or dusk, turning attention inward amid ordinary responsibilities. This expanded the scope of meditation from a specialized vocation to a human capacity. Liberation was no longer framed as distant or exclusive. It became intimate. Historically, this mattered because it grounded meditation in compassion. The practice was not about leaving the world behind, but about understanding it deeply enough to meet it without fear. As meditation matured, insight naturally softened into care. Seeing impermanence did not produce cold detachment, but tenderness. Knowing the fragility of experience opened the heart rather than closing it. By the time Buddhist meditation reached the modern era, it encountered unprecedented conditions. Speed, noise, and constant stimulation reshaped attention itself. Ancient instructions, once given to those living close to the rhythms of nature, now met minds trained to fragment and rush. Yet here again, the historical strength of meditation revealed itself. It did not compete with modernity, it exposed its costs. Meditation began to be taught in new settings: hospitals, prisons, schools, and living rooms. Sometimes stripped of its ethical and philosophical roots, it risked becoming a tool for productivity or stress reduction alone. Yet even in these reduced forms, something essential often slipped through. When a person sat quietly and felt the breath, even briefly, the ancient lineage whispered again. Awareness recognized itself. The historical origins of Buddhist meditation remind us that this practice was never meant to decorate life. It was meant to meet suffering honestly. It did not promise escape from pain, but freedom from confusion. Across centuries, cultures, and interpretations, this intention remains steady. Meditation trained the mind not to grasp at certainty, but to rest in knowing. What emerges from this long history is not a monument, but a method, not a belief, but a way of looking. Meditation is the act of staying when the impulse is to flee, of listening when the habit is to judge, of softening when the reflex is to harden. It is a discipline of intimacy with life as it is, rather than life as imagined. In this sense, the historical origins of Buddhist meditation are not truly behind us. They are present each time a human being chooses to pause instead of react, to observe instead of assume, to feel instead of numb. The forest is no longer required. The palace has already fallen. What remains is the moment, asking to be known. The story of Buddhist meditation does not end in ancient India, nor does it belong solely to monasteries or texts. Its origins live wherever attention meets experience without resistance, from wandering ascetics to settled communities, from oral transmission to written instruction, from forest paths to modern cities. Meditation has carried a single quiet message: freedom begins with seeing clearly. This clarity is not dramatic. It does not announce enlightenment or demand allegiance. It unfolds gently, breath by breath, moment by moment. The historical roots of meditation remind us that awakening was never meant to be extraordinary. It was meant to be human, to feel the body sitting, to know the mind thinking, to allow life to reveal itself without interference. In a world that rewards speed, certainty, and distraction, this ancient practice remains quietly radical. It asks for patience. It invites humility. It offers no guarantees, only guidance. Yet for those who listen, it provides something rare: a way to be at home in one's own experience. If these reflections resonate, if something in you recognizes this lineage not as history but as possibility, you are already part of its continuation. This channel exists as a place to sit together, to reflect, and to remember what has always been available. You are warmly invited to walk this path with us, slowly and sincerely, allowing understanding to deepen in its own time.